No word has received more different significations and has struck minds in so many ways as has liberty. Some have taken it for the case of removing the one to whom they had given tyrannical power. Some for the faculty of electing the one whom they were to obey. Others for the right to be armed and to be able to use violence. Yet others for the privilege of being governed only by a man of their own nation or by their own laws. So says Montesquieu in his Spirit of the Laws. Liberty, it would seem then, is an equivocal concept. But what would Hayek say? I'm Scott Nelson with the Austrian Economics Center and Hayek Institute in Vienna, Austria, and this week we're going to take a look at what Hayek has to say about liberty. So in a previous video, I promised I would one day discuss Hayek's understanding of liberty. I, of course, should have been more prudent back then, since I effectively promised to discuss one of Hayek's most dearly held values. And as such, there are many dimensions to it. So what I'll do in this video is just touch on how he distinguishes it from other ways in which the word liberty has been used, and then leave to future videos discussions of why it is so important, a deeper discussion of the notion of coercion, how liberty connects to some of the other cornerstones of Hayek's philosophy, such as the importance of general laws, and finally, potential questions to which such a definition of liberty gives rise. One other quick note, Hayek doesn't really distinguish between the words liberty and freedom, and so for the sake of this video, I'll also be using them interchangeably. But he does indicate one reason why he prefers the term liberty to freedom, and I find this very interesting. This is why I want to mention it, and it's because he believes that the word liberty is less subject to abuse. So why is this? He cites as an example, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's phrase, freedom from want. But what exactly is such a phrase supposed to mean? And Hayek would say that the unintelligibility of that phrase is made apparent when you use the word liberty instead of freedom. It's a lot more difficult to make sense of the phrase if you talk of liberty from want. And this is an important point for Hayek, because Hayek asks us to pay attention, close attention, to the way we use words. And one of the things that he's concerned about is that liberty, much like democracy or justice or the adjective social that we use to prefix many other nouns, has come to refer to anything that we deem good or desirable. And this can lead to a lot of conceptual confusion and just generally sloppy thinking. Okay, so with that out of the way, how does Hayek understand liberty? Well, quite simply, liberty is the absence of coercion. So you can act according to your own decisions and plans. And coercion, in turn, is when your actions are made to serve the will of someone else for that person's purposes. So what's perhaps most noteworthy here is that coercion really can only refer to a situation where someone is forcing you to do something or preventing you from doing something by means of threats. You cannot say then that you're being coerced, in other words, you cannot say that you are unfree, if circumstances force you to do something. Say, for example, taking a job that you don't really like, or at a low wage just so that you can pay your bills. You also cannot say that you're being coerced if the laws compel you to act or not to act in a certain way. And so this is one of the foundations of liberal and Republican thought, the idea that you were ruled not by men, but by general laws, and that everyone, regardless of their class or their standing, is treated equally by these laws. One of Hayek's great liberal predecessors, John Locke, states the case thus: "Where there is no law, there is no freedom. For liberty is to be free from restraint and violence from others, which cannot be where there is no law." He goes on to define liberty as to dispose and order, as he lists, his person, actions, possessions, and his whole property within the allowance of those laws under which he is, and therein not to be subject to the arbitrary will of another, but freely follow his own. You know that I love citing the great thinkers, and in this video I certainly haven't shied away from doing so, not just because many of them had something valuable to add to the definition of liberty, to Hayek's definition of liberty, but also because Hayek partially saw his own role as reintroducing an idea of liberty, an understanding of liberty, that was held by many thinkers in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries to the 20th century. Hayek wants to reintroduce this understanding to the 20th century, a century that Hayek thought had forgotten or misunderstood the true meaning of liberty. So what are some of the other meanings of liberty that Hayek wants to distinguish his understanding of liberty from? Hayek identifies three other conceptions. These conceptions, by the way, didn't necessarily all originate in the 20th century. The first one is called political liberty, a very old idea of liberty, in fact. Political liberty covers the participation of people in the choice of their government. So when you take the ancient question of what is the best regime, for example, a monarchy, an aristocracy, or a democracy, political liberty can only really be found in a democratic or popular republican government. This was the liberty, for example, to which Jean-Jacques Rousseau subscribed when he said that obedience to the law one has prescribed to oneself is freedom. Now, Hayek is not necessarily unequivocally opposed to this notion, but he does point to potential problems with the idea of political liberty. One is that Hayek rejects the idea that foreigners or children, for example, both of whom are unable to vote, are somehow less free in a liberal country. But Hayek also comes at political liberty from the other angle, which is to say that a free people, a people that enjoy political freedom, is not necessarily a people of free men. So in other words, the state might be free as a collective, which means that its will is not interfered with by other states, but the people within that state might not necessarily be free. And as you'll recall from our video on the problem with democracy, Hayek doesn't think that the right to vote or laws created by majority rule will necessarily guarantee individual liberty. As he states, perhaps the fact that we have seen millions voting themselves into complete dependence on a tyrant has made our generation understand that to choose one's government is not necessarily to secure freedom. Okay, so the second way in which the word liberty is used that Hayek wants to distinguish his liberty from is what's called inner liberty, or what you might also refer to as metaphysical liberty or philosophical liberty. This is the idea that you're free when you're guided by your own considered will or your reason, rather than by momentary impulse, circumstance, emotions, moral, or intellectual weakness. We spend all of our time talking about overcoming external impediments to our will that we forget all of the internal impediments. Inner liberty can also refer to the claim that knowledge will set you free, that all you need to do is to get rid of ignorance and superstition. Now for Hayek, this sort of liberty is not without its merits, but he still wishes to separate it from the liberty that he's interested in, namely absence of coercion, because he's concerned that the discussion of inner freedom all too often leads to the free will versus determinism debate. And Hayek emphatically wishes to avoid that issue because his idea of liberty goes hand in hand with the idea of individual responsibility. And in order for you to be held responsible, to be held accountable, we must be able to say that your actions are freely chosen. And this isn't such an objectionable point. I mean, if you think about it, our entire legal system presupposes that we have a choice in what we do. The third way in which the word liberty is used is in terms of power. So that means freedom as power. The idea that liberty means the ability to do whatever I want. Now for Hayek, this interpretation of liberty is, in fact, the most dangerous. And that's because it allows liberty to be used to cover almost every instance of tearing down impediments to human action, whether they be imposed by circumstances, laws, or individuals. And remember, for Hayek, Liberty is the absence of coercion, and coercion can only be exercised by individuals on other individuals. The danger of liberty as power is that it is limitless, much as man's thirst for power is. Hayek's target in opposing the idea of liberty as power are the socialists, whom Hayek charges with using the term liberty to advocate policies that are destructive of liberty properly understood. So what does Hayek's idea of liberty entail then? What needs to be in place in order for a person not to be coerced? 5 things. Number 1, legal status as a protected member of the community. Number 2, immunity from arbitrary arrest. Number 3, the right to work at whatever you desire to do. Number 4, the right to movement according to your own choice. And number 5, the right to own property. That's it. Now, if you're feeling a little underwhelmed, that may be because these 5 things were traditionally what separated the free citizen from the slave. And now that we've gotten rid of slavery, we might be itching for a little bit more. Hence why the term liberty has been stretched to mean all sorts of things, as we discussed earlier. It's been stretched to encompass promises of power and lofty dreams, without us taking account of potential costs. And that's the thing about true liberty. Liberty as Hayek has defined it. Liberty is a negative virtue, in the sense that it refers only to the absence of coercion. It becomes positive only through what we make of it. It doesn't assure us of opportunities, but leaves it to us to decide what use we shall make of the circumstances in which we find ourselves. For this reason, Hayek is aware that liberty might not even be regarded by many people as a good thing. Many may not see the benefits of liberty, or they may even feel that it's worth giving up liberty. But Hayek argues that liberty may still be desirable, even though not everyone takes advantage of it. As he says, it may well be that the benefits we receive from liberty of all do not derive from what most people recognize as its effects. It may even be that liberty exercises its beneficial effects as much through the discipline it imposes on us as through the more visible opportunities it offers. Liberty is perhaps the sort of thing we're easily inclined to take for granted then. It cannot necessarily be associated with comfort. And this was a point well appreciated through the ages. Alexis de Tocqueville, another liberal with whom Hayek greatly admired, once said, "There is nothing more fruitful in wonders than the art of being free. But there is nothing harder than apprenticeship in liberty. It is not the same with despotism. Despotism often presents itself as the repairer of all the misfortunes suffered. It is the support of legitimate rights, the upholder of the oppressed, and the founder of order. Peoples fall asleep amid the temporary prosperity that it brings forth, and when they awaken, they're miserable. Liberty, in contrast, is usually born amid storms. It is established painfully in the midst of civil discord, and only when it's already old can its benefits be known." Liberty is rare and difficult, but all things excellent are as difficult as they are rare. And that's what Hayek would say.
You know what's funny about this banner here is that it doesn't matter where you move, his eyes always seem to be following you, no matter where you are in the room. You know, it's one of the most mesmerizing and also creepy things. Anyhow, everybody, thank you for checking out this video. We put a lot of work into these videos, so we hope that you're really enjoying them. If you have been, then please feel free to suggest a topic that you'd like us to deal with in a future video. We take all sorts of suggestions, and Hayek has a lot to say about all sorts of different things. And, most important of all, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends.